Hello and welcome to the Old Garage, number 21. I'm Wild Bill, and we've got some questions, we've got some silliness, we've got a shout out, so let's get to it. And first question I have was from Gabriel F., and this is from the Great Race episode. It says, if you were putting together a team for this race, what car would you pick other than the ones that actually went? And are there any drivers or mechanics you try to recruit? Well, I'll tell you what. For that particular race, I would have driven a Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost. I mean, those things were absolutely indestructible and torque monsters. So yeah, I would have had a Rolls. At the same time, for drivers and mechanics. For a driver, I probably would have wanted, I want to be there myself, but to help me out, Barney Oldfield. I would have him. I mean, he was, Ford's driver, racer, quite a good racer at that. And as a mechanic to have with me, I would want Walter Christie. He's, he can make anything work, and so. Yeah, it would be a Rolls Royce with me, Barney Oldfield, and Walter Christie driving across the world. So, okay, great question. I like that. Okay, Daniel Silverthorne, same episode, asked, similar to Gabriel F's question, says, if you were organizing the race, would you have chosen a different route, or would you have stayed with their planned route? You know what? The planned route that they had, I think, would have worked had they started earlier. The real problem with that race, as I mentioned in the episode, was that they didn't think it would take 6 weeks to cross the U.S. They figured it would only take 2. And so if, they started it in, in December or early January, that route would technically possibly be viable, but at the same time, when you're talking, heavy blizzard conditions, with cars, of this vintage and capacity, which wasn't great, it would have been one heck of a ride for any of them. But, I think I would have stuck with the original plan, just done it earlier in the year so that they could have run. Okay, got a question here from the same episode, The Great Race, from Sirleaf. And the question is, would a steam car have had an advantage over petrol cars in a long-distance race such as this, being able to use whatever liquid fuel was available, or even being able to use coal or wood if designed as such, and with steam being a well-known and relatively simple technology compared to early internal combustion. For that matter, were steam cars allowed to compete in the 1908 race, or had the judges taken that into account and made it strictly petrol only? Okay, well, last part of it first, I'll pull a Drock on this. And no, they weren't forbidden to compete. It's just that none came up to the plate. You had White, Stanley, etc. that certainly were vehicles that could have been good contenders. But the other part of the question regarding the fuel and whether they could just use wood and coal. If you had a wood-fired steam car, you could, but they really weren't in production anymore. Steam cars of 1908 were, using the same kind of liquid fuels that petroleum cars were. So fuel-wise, they would have had the same issues. If you were going to have a steam car that was going to still be coal-fired or wood-fired, those were from the 1880s, 1890s, and chances are that wouldn't have worked all so well either. So no, the steam cars at that time would not have had any kind of advantage in being that they could use other types of liquid fuels, because it wasn't that the fuels weren't available in the points and cities and towns where you could get them. It was just how far apart those were, and it didn't matter what kind of vehicle you had. That's going to be a challenge. And to build a steam car, of that time, at that time, 1908, that would go ahead and run on the coal and everything else. Now you're going to have extra passengers to run the fires. And that's going to add extra weight, extra, rations and everything else for yet another person on board. So it just wasn't viable, and I think that's why you didn't have a steam car, involved in it. But I mean, a certain someone, could have done it, but it just didn't happen. Okay, got a question from Craig Hagenbruch here regarding, the Henry Royce episode, number 43. He says, I came across somewhere that the female figure on the hood of all Rolls-Royce's cars was either Henry Royce's wife or mistress, and as a tribute to one of them who died either in the Titanic sinking or the Lusitania sinking. Okay, well, let's clear that up here. What you're talking about is the Spirit of Ecstasy. And this was actually a specific person who it was named after. The sculptor was Charles Sykes, and he used a woman, Eleanor Velasco Thornton, as the model to actually make it. Now, this was originally done in 1909, and it was one of the owners of a Rolls-Royce, John II Bury of Montague, who ordered Charles Sykes to make this as a hood ornament. So Eleanor Velasco had really nothing to do with Royce himself at all. And it is true that she did die in a ship sinking. However, it wasn't the Titanic or the Lusitania. It was actually the SS Persia, which was torpedoed and sunk by the Germans in 1915 in the Mediterranean. But that's who the Spirit of Ecstasy is. It's Eleanor Velasco Thornton, who was the model for Charles Sykes. But beyond that, she had no relationship whatsoever with Henry Royce himself. So there we go. Now, in the same episode, James MacArthur asked, how much did these early cars go for? Okay, well, go for... They were expensive, as far as, in the Rolls-Royce era. You had, in 1900, 1903, 1904, there were cars selling for $4, $5, $6, $7, $10,000. Just depends on, what you're looking for. At the same time, you can get cars for under $1,000. The Mary Oldsmobile was like, I think $795 or something like that in US dollars. So, it's not equal. There's not a single answer you can give to how much did cars go for. But the Rolls Royces, I mean, were almost 12,000 in US dollars at the time for the chassis. And then you would take it to a body, a shop, a carriage builder to put a body on. So yeah, they weren't cheap, that's for sure. Okay, and from the episode on Locomobile, got a couple questions. Seneca Nero asks, what was the normal turning radius of these vintage cars? Is it comparable to modern cars, or wider, or even narrower? Well, frankly, they're very comparable, because turning radius of a car is really a function of two things. Number one, how much can your wheels actually turn on their turn radius, and second, what's the wheelbase, or the distance from the front wheels and the rear wheels. And this is simply just matter of physics. It's true with any automobile. Uh, the closer together your wheels are, the tighter it can turn. And so small cars can turn tighter than big cars. And as far as the steering gear that was involved, rack and pinion was pretty much the way to go and was done by 1900 by just about anybody. You'll, even if it's a tiller steered, it's still going to have that kind of steering mechanism, beyond the steering column itself, be it a tiller or a handlebar or a wheel or whatever. So, it's just how you gear it to make your turn radius. But yeah, cars, just by their nature and the physics of them, the turn radiuses of vintage cars and the cars of today are really pretty much the same. It's just how big the car is and how it's configured that's going to determine whether or not it can make a U-turn, on a single lane road, or if it's going to have to do a 3-point turn. And that's not going to be determined by vintage. It's going to be determined just by the layout of the vehicle and how far apart the wheels are and how much they can turn. So, yeah. Another question on that episode, James MacArthur. Yes, I find it interesting that basically the Stanley brothers had to only work there for 1 year and were then free to start another company. Usually in today's world, the non-compete is for several years. Do you know if this was common in the vintage car years for a former owner of auto companies being free to start up another company so soon after selling? Well, you have to keep in mind that non-competes, in the way that we think of them, were individual things at the time and not necessarily commonly done. But when someone was buying out a company like that, in the case of like Oldsmobile, it's like, yeah, you can go ahead and try it again, but you can't have the name. We have it. And in the case of Locomobile, it was like, okay, we're gonna make a new name, and you can do your own thing. It was about ownership of a brand, and that's what made it different. If you wanted to start a new brand, okay, fine. But if you're want to sell your company and then start the same brand, no, that wasn't going to be doable. The non-competes as we know them today, they did exist at that point, but were they the normal thing? Not really. It was basically either you're going to use go back into the business under a new brand, but you can't use your old brand. And for in Locomobile's case, they said, okay, we've bought your company, so they changed Stanley. In this case, they changed it from the Stanley Motor Carriage Company to the Stanley Company, which satisfied the needs. So they just couldn't keep the name. Okay, now I do have one more question, but quite frankly, the question is silliness. So, and this was from the episode on Mark Burgett, and this was from Carter. And Carter asked, question or silliness, what would you do if you owned Jay Leno's car collection? Oh my word, what I would do. Okay, so this is our silliness. Well, first of all, a car collection is representative of the person that has the collection. So he has 150 cars, because he said car collection because Jay Leno has a whole bunch more motorcycles and such, but we're talking just about the cars. I'm going to be honest and say that, I would probably sell off about a third of it. And the third that I would sell off would be the Maseratis, the Lamborghinis, some of the newer stuff, the stuff that's, my drive is for the vintage veteran, go way back. And a car collection is going to be a reflection of the owner and what they love. Okay? So, yeah, and hopefully I would have the resources to take care of them like he does too if I got them. Okay, I'm just going to say that. But I would actually sell off a lot of those cars. And I would take that money and invest it in the cars that Jay Leno isn't into, because he really doesn't like the 1890s cars and the early 1900s. I mean, he's got some, some steam cars from that era, but he considers them, and I've heard him say this on his, on Jay Leno's Garage, he considers them spindly, and so he doesn't really like them. Well, I love them, so I would sell those off, and I would get some of those, okay, and and bring in some mechanics, that could keep them up and running, because I would want it to, it would become a reflection of myself. But he's got, Duesenbergs, he's got Dobles, he's got Whites, I mean, he's got Crane Simplex. I mean, the cars that he has are just freaking gorgeous, that are in the era that I just adore. And, I'd love to jump into his 1918, Cadillac and go driving around, with its green headlights. But the thing is that if I got his collection, I would make it my own, and that's how I would make it my own. The stuff from the 60s, 70s, 80s, etc. I would sell. And I would use that money to get stuff from the 1890s and early 1900s, and get them, whatever condition I get them either restored or keep them running. So that's what I do. Okay, now I do have a shout out, and this is an important one, because the thing is that there's a young man in Poland that is making a history channel, and I have to say it's outstanding. Okay, and if you're watching this right now, you like history, I assume. He doesn't talk about automotive history, but it's outstanding. You've got to check out A Pinch of History. Now, this young man is not only doing an outstanding job of just putting together and editing, his videos, but he's doing the research behind it. This young man's actually doing experimental archaeology on the channel, and his channel's less than 6 months old. And the episodes that he's put together are just engaging. And if you like history, and if you're watching my channel, I assume you do, you have got to check out A Pinch of History. This young man needs your support. Go and like and subscribe, okay? Do it right now. Well, that's what we have today for the Old Garage, and we will see you next time. Peace.